Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Christian Recorder Dialogues and our pop-ups for the 2024 election. Because sometimes you just got to pop out and show people. We are excited to have with us today Mr. Antjuan Seawright, and we're going to be digging into some very important election strategies, specifically as we look at how we engage our communities. As we know, our churches are rooted in various spaces in this country, and today we're going to be talking about ways that you can leverage your church to engage your community and give them the information, give your community the information that it needs to vote in this election, because communities are people. And if we're not reaching the people, who are we reaching? As always, we invite you to join with us and to share in the chat your comments and let us know where you are, where you're coming from. And we also want to give a special shout out to Dr. Jacqueline DuPont Walker and the A&E Vealer Initiative. And if you have not already, make sure you pay attention to the daily countdowns that are coming through your emails, and also make sure that you visit the Alert's website for information on how to go vote. And I believe we have an example of one of those daily countdown emails here. I just want to show it to you right here. You begin to see your emails every day, and we want to make sure that you pay attention and share this news. This is Seawright. You're no stranger to the Christian Recorder Dialogues, to us. Welcome today, brother. Welcome.
Well, Dr. John Thomas III, it's good to be back with you, and certainly always good to engage with the Christian Recorder audience. I am no stranger, but I also like to make certain that folks know that I am a proud AME, fifth generation AME. My uncle is the 133rd elected and consecrated bishop of our church, and I still reign and still rooted and tooted in the 7th Episcopal District, where our new bishop, will lead us and guide us for the remainder of his term. And I'm just so excited about what the future holds for our church.
And I should just say Bishop 133 is now the Bishop of the 13th. So I just want to give a shout out to my Bishop, Harry Lee Seawright. So let's dig into this. Now, Antjuan, you are no stranger to the party. We know also, in fact, that you were at the Democratic National Convention. One of our columnists, Brandy Effiam, got to meet with you and sit with you. But we've been getting a lot of noise these last few days about polls. So let's start talking about polls. How do we make sense of these national polls and this tightening of the race at this level?
Well, this race is going to be a 50-50 jump ball, and it's going to come down to the wire. But this roller coaster ride that we're often taken on, and those of us who participate in the American political experiment, is always a bunch or a series of twists and turns. However, the only polls that matter are the ones on election day and how well we show up. And those polls are determined largely by coalitions and constituencies, and what party or what candidate can put together the strongest coalition or strongest collection of constituencies, diverse constituencies, to get to the end result. I think for this election purposes and for my mission in this election, it is important to note that Black Americans and Black voters will have the largest say-so than they've ever had in the history of this country. 34.4 million eligible Black voters to participate or can participate in this election. Dr. Thomas, that's a 7% increase according to Pew Research from the 2020 election. So that means the bloodline of those who once picked cotton is now the bloodline and has in their hands the power to pick not only the presidency, but on down to the precinct in this country. God is faithful. God is good. The last shall be first.
I see what you did there with that pick thing. And I want to dig into this a little bit more because, as many of you listeners know, I'm a political scientist. I teach politics at the College of Charleston here in South Carolina. And, what are polls? A poll is only as good as the people who are running it. And what we're seeing right now is basically the normal, what my colleagues would call this is the horse race part of the election, where everyone's like, is it up? Is it down? Is it up? Is it down? Again, we know, just like in 2016, we learned that Trump persons were underpolled. And in 2020, we learned that in Georgia, African Americans were underpolled. I want you to hear from someone who does this for a living, well, from two people who do this from a living, from the academic side and from the policy side, that the only polls that matter are the ones that are you voting or not? because you give me a question, I could give you a poll that could show Trump winning black people if you, depending upon the question you give. It's about the questions you ask and who's in these polls. And in this horse trading part of the election, do not be disturbed or confused by the polls. This is going to be close. You can't stay home. You have to go make your voice heard. Antjuan?
And John, say this. Polls have historically always counted us out. But every time polling and some people count us out as Black Americans, we've always showed up to teach them that they do not know how to count. I remind folks on my side of the fence or in my world that polls are a snapshot of the time, but they never define the time. And polls are not the final indicator, but they are one of many indicators. Polling is a science. Voter participation is an art, meaning we get to draw the picture based on what the science does or does not tell us. And so we have the pen in our hand to draw the picture of what our future looks like.
Yeah, and again, so when you're speaking to the members at your churches, when you're speaking around the tables in these next few weeks, understand that people are saying, "Oh, well, my state is this, my state is Y." The only thing that matters is, did you go vote?
And John, that's an important point, because so many people get caught up on, well, my state this and my state that. Well, it's more, and I know we're going to get into this later, but it's not just the presidency on the ballot. In 10 states around the country, a woman being trusted to make her healthcare decisions, reproductive freedom, reproductive justice is on the ballot. State judges, mayors, city council, county officials, state legislators, governor's races, U.S. Senate, everything you can imagine, lottie-dottie and everybody is on this November ballot party. And that's why our participation matters. And John, let me just tell you, every time we have showed up, Black Americans, the tectonic plates in this country have shifted. That's why, as I've been traveling the country, and I was with Bishop Jackson just last week, and I was on the phone with the Women's Missionary Society and the Mighty Second. And I said to both of those groups that Black folks are casting a survival vote in this election, because whomever wins in November will have policy-making power to determine, largely or not, whether or not communities that look like all of ours live or die. Forget about survive or thrive. It's simply live or die, because the other side has been very clear that they want to not just roll back the clock, they want to take the battery out of the clock to the progress we made. Basic fundamental freedoms are on the ballot. Basic fundamental freedoms that we have recently been able to enjoy and unlock as Black Americans hangs in the balance. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, a woman being trusted to make her own healthcare decisions, education on the ballot, environmental protections on the ballot, the right to vote on the ballot. All these things are on the ballot, and we have to remember, as Black Americans and as Americans, period, we've made a lot of progress, yes, but all progress is not permanent. So some parts of this election are about simply protecting and solidifying the progress we made. If you don't believe me, or you don't take my word for it, think about this, John. Dr. Thomas, excuse me. You earn your PhD. I got to make sure I get it. But a woman or a little girl born today has less body autonomy or less control, say so, over her body than her parents and grandparents. Diversity, equity, inclusion, as we know it, that some people thought was going to be here until kingdom come, this right-wing activist court has reversed course. So simple, think about voting rights and how we went from having the right to participate and trying to work on expanding those rights. And then a Supreme Court has simply, over time, continued to gut it, those rights. That's why voting for us is an exercise. It's almost like going to church. John, we can't go to church one Sunday and think that's going to be the cure all to all of our spiritual issues and dynamics. We have to keep showing up Sunday after Sunday, the same way we have to keep showing up to the barbershop or the beauty parlor, the nail salon. We have to keep mowing our grass or keep going to the gym. It's an exercise, and our faith must be put in action through that exercise called voting.
You know, let's talk about some of these down ballot races, because I think that this is going to help guide us, because we need to understand that this election, for example, I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I can almost go to bed on the fact that this electoral college in this state, the votes in the electoral college in this state, will undoubtedly go to former President Donald Trump. In Charleston, however, we have a school board that currently is under control by Moms for Liberty, and there's a possibility of voting some persons out and changing control of the board. We also have a Democratic sheriff who is in the fight for her electoral life here against some radical Republicans who are trying to take office. She's one of the few female sheriffs in this state. So even though there's some people saying, we already know Trump's going to win, there are other races in this state that are important. And when we think about down ballot, understanding that at the federal level, you have a president, but there's a Congress and a Senate. And Black voters are uniquely positioned to impact the control of Congress. Furthermore, we have state legislatures. We have these county officials that are there. So, Antjuan, in your experience, being and working in voter engagement and helping to understand people, helping people understand the importance of these, what are some of the things that you can tell us to help people understand just how important these down ballot races are?
Well, let me say it this way. The closer your government is to you, the more important it is for you. Little Antjuan is in trouble.
We're going to patent that. I like that. We're going to patent that. I like that.
John, let me just say to you, in certain countries, they cut people's hands off for stealing. So
I say give you credit. You know how we do with the Black people. I'm going to give you credit one time. Don't go say it's mine.
Yeah. No, but on a serious note, John, if little Antjuan gets in trouble, you can't call the White House or the State House. You have to call your school board member. If the trash is not being picked up, depending on where you live, you have to call your county commissioner or your city council person. If you get in trouble and you're looking for an expungement opportunity or PTI, you have to call your local prosecutor, and so on with the example. So that's why I declare and live by the closer your government is to you, the more important it is for you. But let me just tell you how God has given us from his hands to our hands the power to make history. Literally is in our hands. Think about this, John. Take the presidency off the conversation. While we are so excited to have the opportunity to elect the first woman of color who happens to be a former prosecutor, happens to be a former United States senator, former attorney general, former sitting vice president, member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, member of the Lynx, happened to be named Kamala Harris. While we're excited about that, that's not the only thing that we can do in this election. We can send 2 Black women to the United States Senate. We can send a Black man from Texas to the United States Senate. 10 states will have the ability to determine reproductive freedom in this country. The fact that we, in our hands, have the power and history-making ability to determine whether or not the next Speaker of the House will be a Black man from Brooklyn by the name of Hakeem Jeffries. The power in our hands to determine whether or not the first Black assistant speaker and Joe Neguse, a 40-year-old Black man from Colorado, will be a reality. I mean, there's so many opportunities up and down that ballot where we get to control the power. And when you think about the Congress, if Democrats control the Congress, that means we will have a record number of congressional Black caucus members, not just in the body, but controlling the policy maneuver and movements from chairing committees to subcommittee chairs, meaning having a real power grip on what's going on. So that's why on down that ballot, those races are so important. And then we get to nonpartisan races, like school board races, where you have these right-wing extreme activists by the name of Mom versus Liberty, who clearly want out of the clock. And they want to control school boards because they believe that we should ban books instead of bullets. They believe we should whitewash history. They believe, and others in their party, they believe that slavery was a job training program that generationally benefited Black people. they believe the Civil War was about states' rights and not any other rights. These are what these people believe. And so that's why these elections are so important. You mentioned school board elections in South Carolina. Well, let's just look at school board elections around the country, but let's zero in South Carolina. Wherever Moms for Liberty have shown up and where they played and won their school board races, the first thing they've done is fired Black superintendents and tried to control the curriculum in the language of free parent choice or parental choice. We all know what that's code word for. That means whitewash history, tell the convenient parts, and do not allow our children to be exposed to the real pieces of history so that we can learn from history and not repeat it. Well, America's first Black librarian said it so clearly: free people read freely. So we must look at this election as a freedom election, whether it's the freedom to love, freedom to live, freedom to read, freedom to own, freedom to build, freedom to worship, freedom to just live in a God-given environment where we are not where we are not on the menu, but instead at the table.
Man, that Mom versus Liberty thing, and shout out to Darren Calhoun, Run DLC, who was running in Charleston. He is a Morehouse grad. Just want to lift that up. But as we're talking to our churches, I know we've talked about Kamala at large a lot, but it's not just about Vice President Harris or the presidency. Like you said, the closest thing to you is your dog catcher, is your mayor, is your school board. So one of the things, and for those of you who are listening, and you've heard Dr. DuPont Walker say this, and we're telling you again, is to help people understand why you need to vote. We need to talk about the necessity of voting for all these races. We just can't come out every 4 years. We have to help people understand that government is always ongoing. What were we going to say, Ms. Seawright?
John, I was just going to say, what's a preacher if he doesn't have deacons in the choir? And look at the presidency as the pastor. The pastor. What's a pastor? They do not have a deacon and choir and church officials. And what's a good church, America, if the congregation is not happy? You can have a preacher and you can have all the elements, but if you do not have a happy congregation, then we're not getting it right. And so that's why my little black job that I continuously do is so important. And that's to educate, update, but also to motivate. Because scripture is clear about a couple of things, John. Scripture is clear, Dr. John. Scripture is clear saying my people perish due to the lack of knowledge. Scripture is also clear saying there's wickedness in high places. That based on what we're up against. But one of the most important scriptures that I've applied to every single election is Proverbs 29:2, when it says the people rejoice, or the people thrive, one translation, when the righteous are in charge. And the B clause of that says the people moan, or the people groan when the wicked rule. Street translation, John, says the people are pissed off when the wicked rule. And I think we have to apply that to our everyday living, our everyday giving, whatever that looks like, whether it's our time, whether it's our money, or whether it's our vote, but also exercising our God-given right to participate in every single race, in every single election, because as the old folks say down south, what you don't use, you're bound to lose.
And so we encourage you here today, Vice President Harris, the presidency is important. We encourage you to educate yourself on the platforms of Vice President Harris, former President Trump, and make an informed decision. But we also encourage you to look at every single race that's impacting your community. Get your sample ballot. If you don't understand what a race is for example, the League of Women Voters. Go to your local church. Ask your pastor, what is this that we're voting for? Many of our churches have hosted town halls. Many of our churches are involved in nonprofit, in nonpartisan engagement. Educate yourself and then educate your family, because voter education is what is key here. Antjuan.
Let's talk about the Black church for a second, because I think it's important for us to have historical note. You'll hear me say this, and my Baptist friends get mad, and some of the other denominations. But when the Black church leads our country, our community, and the Constitution succeeds. And particularly when the AME church leads, the tectonic plates in this country shift and we no longer bleed. And so the Black church has always played a pivotal role. And people always get into these, I think, straw man discussions or straw woman discussions about the role of the church. Let me just say this. Every major social movement in this country that's been successful has had some key ingredients. It's had young people, it's had Black people, that's Black men and Black women. They've had the Black press, like the Christian Recorder, the oldest Black publication on record. But also they've had the Black church. Always has been on the front line. When we could not organize in traditional spaces, we organized by way of our churches. And I don't think we can lose sight of the role and the historical nature that the Black church plays. And let me break it down a little more simple, because I believe in the KISS concept, keep it simple, Seawright. And so I'm going to try to do that as best I can on this program, John. And when we talk about the role of the Black church, if we can't depend on the Black church to be a source of information, then who else can we depend on? No more trusted artery or no more trusted nerve center than any community in any community than the Black church. And so while we may not present as partisan, we're political as if we ever want to be. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And I think, and we're going to stay here for a second as we talk more about Black churches and voter mobilization in this current environment, because I had the privilege of reading an advanced copy of a wonderful book that's coming out about Mother Emanuel next year. And it talked about how going all the way back to Bishop Richard Harvey Kane, how Mother Emanuel, from the time it was rebuilt after the Civil War, was a place for political engagement. And that's why I chuckled when I heard some people, like your frat brother, Mark Lamont Hill, wondering why we were desecrating our pulpit, having Biden come in, when if you knew our story, and I wrote about this in the Recorder, if you know about AMEs use whatever resource we have to educate our people. And one of those places is the pulpit in our church. And that pulpit was built by people who were as engaged in the politics of Charleston as anyone else. So I chuckled when I saw these ahistorical comments about Mother Emanuel and Biden being there. But it's a different world we're in right now. And I want to talk to you, and because you've been on the ground, you've been in a lot of places. So as you're seeing the need for voter mobilization, specifically, what do our churches need to know and understand about this current moment regarding voting mobilization?
Well, first and foremost, they need to know that Black Americans and Brown Americans are the number one targets for misinformation, disinformation. I know I'm going to have to ask for forgiveness after I say this, but lies, particularly where we're consuming our news. We consume most of our news online, and that's where Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Republicans are just heavily overly targeting us with misinformation. That's why the church has to be a source of information and education for our people. Because again, my people perish due to the lack of knowledge. I also think it's important for our church to know, the AME church, and churches in general, because I know this will be shared widely, is that you can't assume that people always know what has happened or what the value of their vote. You can't assume. Because if I were to run the receipts, as we say in the neighborhood, about what's been done the past 4 years, most people could not even rehearse or regurgitate some of the things been done. Most people do not know we have more Black Americans that have health insurance than ever before. Most churchgoers do not know that more Black businesses have started up in the past 4 years than ever before, led by Black women. Most people probably cannot tell you we have more Black women on our nation's highest courts in this past 4 years than all of the presidents combined, including a Black woman on the United States Supreme Court. Most people do not know we have the lowest unemployment on record. Most people do not know we closed the racial wealth gap for the first time in 30 years. Most people do not know, because of your vote and because of the advocacy of our church, $35 a month insulin is a reality. And starting in January 2025, we will not pay more. Seniors will not pay more than $2,000 a year for their prescription drugs. Most parishioners of any congregation probably couldn't tell you We made the largest investment in the climate crisis in the history of the world. Most parishioners probably cannot tell you. We passed the first piece of major gun legislation in 30 years. And as a direct result, violent crimes are down in this country, led by Columbus, Ohio, where we just had our general conference. Most people cannot tell you that we created 60 million jobs to include 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 900,000 construction jobs, 2.2 million jobs for Black Americans. A lot of people get it confused. The fact we made the largest investment in our nation's infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, and ports. And thanks to Jim Clyburn, a good AME, my mentor and political father, $68 billion went to internet access, and so that we can do things like this virtual conversation, and while church offerings have gone up around the country, and where people can worship online from wherever they are, because internet access is now not just a luxury, it's a requirement for us to live and to survive. Most people probably did not know that when we were in a once-in-a-century pandemic, and while Donald Trump and Republicans were telling us to drink bleach, and Black Americans were dying at 3 to 4 times more than any other constituency, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris said, we're going to pay off the capital debt of every public HBCU in this country. And now that investment is up to $17 billion. Most people cannot tell you $100 million went to save Black and brown businesses. People were able to get PPP loans like churches. $40 billion went to save and keep people in their home and pay their utilities. Veterans had access. School districts had what they need to make certain that kids could come back to school safely. And all these things, a lot of things people cannot tell you that. And then, John, the fact is what the church plays an even more critical responsibility and role is how we look forward. The fact that Vice President Harris says if she's president, medical debt will no longer be a liability on your credit report. She's going to give $50,000 to help start up a $50,000 tax credit for startup businesses. Most people can't tell you that she said we're going to give $25,000 for first-time home buyers. We're going to build 3 million homes. You will not pay more than 7% of your income in child care. For those who take care of seniors at home, we're going to make sure that Medicare shares the burden and the brunt of that, because we know people are living longer and the pressures on families to come up with that. We're going to expand and extend the child tax credit to make it stronger. We're going to give a $6,000 tax credit for those who need it, who having a child. And the biggest lie that keeps floating around the Black church, and this is why the church is so important in around our community, particularly Black men, is that Donald Trump gave us checks. What most people cannot tell you is that it was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that gave us $1,400 stimulus checks and the child tax credit, $300 per child, up to $3,500 a month per child per household for 6 months, and we cut Black child poverty in half. That's what our vote got us, and I named some of the things that our vote would get us. And then just today, she rolled out a policy initiative specific to Black men, whether it's up to $1 million for loan debt relief and all these other things that she laid out, a healthcare initiative, and all these things that she laid out in a plan. When you compare that to concepts of a plan or as ignored a plan, I mean, that's the difference. Well, John, I take that back. Pardon my ignorance. They have a plan. It's called Trump's Project 2025.
Now we go get to Project 2025 in a second, but I want us to sit here for a second with what you talked about regarding the mobilization issues coming back to education. Now, you just called the role of a lot of important initiatives, and I want our listeners, this is why we stream this, you can replay this and listen to this. I was reading a New York Times article where they interviewed like 15 Black men. Uh-huh. And 3 of the Black men interviewed said, well, Trump did more for HBCUs than Biden. He saved them. That's a bold-faced lie. And one of the things I will say, now I don't know if you will say this, but I will say is that we know the Democratic Party has not done a good job of messaging, of this messaging and sharing what it has done. And for example, there's a reason why Trump wanted to put his signature on the stimulus checks. And as someone who teaches politics outside the country, I understand how certain leaders do certain things in the playbook they're pulling from. But y'all, just sit in this for a second about all the things we've seen happen. We were used to, for 4 years, waking up and seeing what matters on Twitter today. The fact that we don't have any drama on X, the fact that we're complaining about legitimate, this should tell us this is the way government's running. Now, there's a website that we're going to put up online. It's called Onyx Impact. Onyx Impact is an initiative of a variety of Black groups that is targeted towards combating misinformation. They've done a report where it shows how certain groups funded by Russia, funded by other organizations, have targeted African Americans, particularly African American male spaces, to share certain propaganda and lies. And as Antjuan would say, you know the playbook. This election is a nail biter. It only takes turning a few votes to make a shift. And so I encourage you, we are here for education. We are here to discuss. And I encourage you, go to onyximpact.org. They're funded and work with NAACP and other groups that we do know and trust, and take a look for yourself and see this web of misinformation that exists. And so a key part of this voter mobilization has simply got to be sit people down and tell them the truth.
And, John, I love the Black church, but I'm not always in love with the people of the Black church, because sometimes we get our priorities wrong.
Yes.
In many cases, we've lost our why and our way. Again, the Black church has always led and always been a source of information, a key trusted source of our information. And I think we have to be the best ambassadors for our cause. If you can testify about one single thing that your vote has gotten you, you need to be testifying not just to yourself, you need to be testifying to Lottie and everybody, because people trust you as a leader. I don't care if you hold a church position or not. I don't care what you are. If you know, you must share. And if you don't know, you must ask. And that's the attitude. That's why I'm doing this. And that's why I'm traveling this country. And that's why any pastor or any Episcopal district who wants me to share information about this election and why it's important and what's been done and what their vote has gotten, I will do it. I will drop whatever I'm doing to do it, because I want the Black church to get back to the place where we are the information source, because Black people have traditionally been pro-value, anti-institution, with the exception of the Black church. And most people say, oh, everybody doesn't go to church. I agree. But everybody knows somebody who does go to church, and they have a different level of trust to whom much is required of. For those of us who are worshipers and believers, believe it or not, we're leaders within our own right, and people look at us differently. They expect different from us, including the way we participate and how much we are informed and engaged about stuff going on around us. Because when it goes wrong, they're looking to us first. So let's allow them to look to us first, with the opportunity to shape what's right.
All right, well, let's dig in a little bit more. So we've talked about empowerment, voter engagement strategies for local churches. We've talked about down-ballot races. Let's talk about Black men. Now, this week, our beloved former president, whom I don't always agree with, made a comment talking about basically saying that he had not seen among African-American men the same level of enthusiasm that was seen in 2008. And there was a response to that, which I found interesting, from a advocate who said, it's unfair to single out Black men when we look at the patriarchy that's hitting Latino men and white men, and understanding that of those groups, Black men are more likely to actually appreciate a matriarchy than other groups. So I want us to sit with and talk about, what are we looking at regarding Black men in this election? And Obama's comments and this belief that, are the brothers really not coming out for Kamala? Are there people really coming out for Trump because of her? Just What do we do? And to be honest, is it an unfair burden that we're placing on Black men for some of these issues and concerns?
So let's do historical kickback, if you will. In 2016, 13% of Black men voted for Donald Trump, the most unqualified person to ever run for the job, who was running against the most qualified person at that time to ever run for the job. And we lost. We lost the election. They put 3 right-wing extremists on the nation's highest court for lifetime appointments, 204, I think, judges on the federal benches at the lower courts level for lifetime appointments, quite a few of them who had never been in a courtroom before. And then we all know what came along with Donald Trump, calling African countries asshole countries, calling Mexicans rapists and thugs. When it came to immigration in this country, said that Mexico, said we were going to build a wall, Mexico was going to pay for it. That was going to be the end of our immigration issues. He cut the Affordable Care Act, tried to do away with a lot of programs that benefit Black Americans, and so many other things that we can point to as a result of Black men and others not participating in the 2016 election. So here we are in 2024, same conversation, same constituency. It's not fair to put all the pressure on Black men because white women, white men, Latino, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, men and women, all these other constituencies have just the same obligation, not just opportunity to participate as much as Black men. But since the burden is on Black men, as it has been in time before, we have to meet the moment. And I think we have a responsibility, obligation, and opportunity to support someone who looks like our mother, who understands the value of our family like our grandmothers, who's a nurturer and a caregiver like some of our sisters, but also reflective of what we want our daughters to look like. Because on the other side to that, we got someone who wants to dismantle the Black family unit and does not give 2 flying kites about the Black family unit. Someone who started their political career saying that Barack Obama, the first Black president, was not a United States citizen. Someone who has a businessman in New York called for the execution of now the exonerated 5. Someone who called a Black woman, Omarosa, who worked for him, a dog. Someone who said the NFL players that were kneeling in the name of police brutality said that the SOB should be fired. Someone who is dying with white nationalists and white supremacists. Someone who said there's good people on both sides. Someone who called for an insurrection on the Capitol that caused lives to be lost and has celebrated and said he would pardon people who hung noose in the United States Capitol. That's what we're up against. And it's not a joke. And so for our Black brothers out there, I'm not here to talk down to you or talk at you. I'm here to talk with you because, look, I understand that the wheels of progress has sometimes rolled slower for us. I understand that the pace of progress is sometimes slower for us than everyone else. But it doesn't mean we give up because so many times throughout history and even now, we're seen as the nerve center of the Black family. We are what the Black family unit is centered on and centered around. So when we are empowered, our families are empowered. And when we have the opportunity to uplift one of our own, why would we not? Particularly on the other side of that, when we have someone who wants to roll back the clocks of progress and dismantle everything we stand for and what we stood for.
Wow. You know, I want us to sit here again with this and just think about the fact that, for example, at General Conference, we received messages from Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden. We played them both on the YouTube for a variety of reasons. Neither one was able to be in presence at the General Conference, but they sent messages to the church. We had to turn off the comments on Vice President Harris's message because somehow it got out and there were so many trolls with obscene messages and comments on a church YouTube page that we had to shut the comments off.
John, let's put a pause there. That ought to tell you that these people who claim to be GOP, God's only party, they're not what they say they are. It also ought to tell you that racism is real, bigotry and hate is real, white nationalists are an elevated thing, and white supremacy and Christian white nationalism is real in this country, and we cannot forget that. That's why I'm so passionate about the role the Black church plays, because if you look at the alternative, they're organizing white churches. I think the number is 44,000 white churches in the name of evangelicals have organized, and they're laying hands on the former president when they're in his presence. They're praying for him. They're on TV advocating for him. They're doing all these things. They're signing supporter letters and sending out messages and text messages, probably sending out smoke signals too, about the former president. And here we are allowing people who don't have our best interests at heart to tell us we should not be doing this or we can't do that. The devil is a liar, and so are they.
Wow. And and I know one of the other lightning rods that sometimes gets used is abortion, and saying, Planned Parenthood was using eugenics and it's a scheme to kill Black babies. And and to those things I say, whether you're pro-choice, pro-life, let's be very clear. We can tell you which party supported child care for infants and which didn't. We could tell you which party was going to cut WIC and which didn't. So which party is going to care for your child after they're born? And again, sometimes people say, well, how can you all as a church? I'm like, well, we as a church care for the unborn and for those who are born. And as a Christian, my job is to make sure that everyone has the best shot at a great life. And so do not be deceived by people who try to throw certain images about life, about what life means onto us because of what they view the Bible to be. And I believe, Brother Seawright, you really, this conversation we're having with Black men, Black faith, these are hit points for us. And we also saw another hit point for us at the General Conference, LGBTQ rights. It's no secret that the AME Church, it has a diversity of opinions regarding gay marriage. But I can tell you one thing, there's one party that will take care of your family, and there's one party that won't. And there are discussions that we can have in family, but when we come out the room, it's about, like you said in the beginning, are you going to be at the table or on the menu? And I think that right there to me resonated more than anything what you said today, Brother Seawright.
Well, Dr. Thomas, I'll say it like this. You can have your disagreements on the issues, but let's be aligned on values. And we have to learn as Black Americans, as the Black church, is that we're a diverse group of people. We're not going to agree on everything. In fact, my head and my heart and my body don't agree on most days of the week. My head says I shouldn't get up out of this bed. My body says I need to. And my heart says, well, I can do it another day. And then you end up being fat. So I say that to say that we have to learn how to yell in the places we agree and whisper in the places we disagree. And look, we're going to have some disagreements. That's okay. That's not new to us. That's true to us. But by and large, what Kamala Harris is offering and Democrats is a lot different and more for us and align with our values than anything Donald Trump and Republicans can offer.
Wow. Well, let's move on. I know we try to keep these at an hour, so we have one more question that we want to get to today. And someone just brought up, remind us that don't forget January 6th, someone who tried to hang his VP. Yes, we remember the chance to hang Mike Pence. We've got one more question we want to get to today, and you brought it up, and we spent our last voter engagement pop-up talking about 2025 and health. So, Brother Seawright, let's take a look at Project 2025 and policy. So last time we looked at Project 2025 and health. So in your mind, as you've traveled around the country and done a deep dive, and I remember at the Democratic National Convention, every night they were pulling out parts of Trump's ungodly Bible. What are some of the issues that we should be concerned with regarding Project 2025? Specifically, with us talking to Black folk around these churches.
Well, let me summarize. Let me say it this way: Project 2025 is a document written in 2024 reads like it was written in 1944, but has impact for our lives in 2084. A 922-page document that will simply read like Jim Crow 2.0. If Donald Trump says the policies are scary, you know it's got to be scary. And the fact of the matter is they're unapologetic about firing 50,000 Schedule C employees in the federal government, eliminating the Department of Education, which means that $5 billion, 170 million Americans got the student loan debt wiped out. That goes away. They're unapologetic about eliminating and dissolving Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid as we know it, rolling back the protections from the Affordable Care Act, getting rid of the $35 of insulin and capping the prescription drugs, doing away with pay for mandatory overtime. And that's just a snippet of what's in the document. I'll tell you how one gentleman said it to me on a program I was on. He said, if you really want to keep certain things from certain people, just put a little bit of information in a big old book. And if that don't work, just put it in the fine print. So they expect us not to be educated about the threat that's in that 922-page document. They also expect us to be fooled that Donald Trump has nothing to do with it. Well, let me just declare and remind folks, in 2017, the Heritage Group, this right-wing, extreme, radical, red meat organization, created Project 2017. Wasn't 922 pages, but it was an extreme document that was a blueprint for policy in this country when Trump became president. 334 recommendations, 217 were implemented into law by way of legislation, the agency level, or executive order. Same group of people, just a different year, and they've expanded the footprint. So the people who are advising Trump are the same people who are writing these documents. If you listen to what he has said, the language he's using almost overlaps directly with some of the language in that document. And that's what we have to defeat in this next election.
So we do not want you to be deceived. And I'm saying that language on purpose. Understand, Project, as much as the further Trump tries to run from Project 2025, the more it catches up with him. And also understand, we're not saying Project 2025 is, there are Black people who are writing in this. There are white people writing this. This is a radical reformation of the way this country works. And it's a wish list that, and I'm sure, like we said the last call, don't let this be normalized, because every 4 years, both parties write their ideas for when they get into office. But this, what we've seen, is as far right as it has gone. And there is hardly anything in there that will be beneficial for those of us who desire a federal government that works, protects its citizens, and truly protects our liberty. This is not about, a party. This is not about race. This is about the very lives that are at stake in these United States. So, Brother Seawright, we're coming up on an hour or so. I just want to ask, you've been around the country. You have been from California to Kalamazoo to Cape Cod, dealing with these issues and traversing in this campaign. And I text you every now and then saying, Seawright, how we looking? Seawright, what's going on? Give us some final words for the pastors, the lay leaders, the folks who will be driving these buses of souls to the polls, the people who are living in states that their candidate they vote for may not make it, but they still going to take these people to the polls anyway. What words, as someone who sits with Jim Clyburn on a regular basis, who rode on Air Force Two to the DNC, I knew that happened with you. What are some words that you can give us going forward?
Well, I'll give you words that I'm told my grandmother's grandfather would always say before he got to preach on. I mentioned in the opening that I'm fifth generation AME. My grandmother's grandfather was a sharecropper and preacher during his day. Built the church in North South Carolina near Orangeburg County. That church was burned down during the church burnings of that day. That church is now rebuilt. It's called the Butler Chapel AME Church. It's named after my grandmother's grandfather, the Reverend Moses Butler Felder. I'm told that every time he would get up to preach, he would indicate that today somebody's life is on the line, somebody's soul is at stake. And this was a repeated thing over and over and over. Somebody's life is on the line, somebody's soul is at stake. So I think for our pastors, for our lay people, and for anybody else who may watch this communication or watch this video, everything we do between now and November 5th, we have to have one thought in mind. Somebody's life is on the line, somebody's soul is at stake. And so that should force all of us to double down and triple down on making certain that our people are not just informed and engaged, but they're motivated and participating. Because however we show up in this election, Black Americans, the Black church, and every other constituency that falls under the Black umbrella will determine or not whether or not communities live or die, our parishioners live and die, our friends live or die. Forget about survive and thrive, it's live or die. And we have to take that approach in everything we do. Every time we preach, every time we speak, every time we organize, every time we meet, every time we pray, just know that somebody's life is on the line, somebody's soul is at stake.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful. Well, again, in the words of Dr. DuPont Walker, again, go vote. It's our watch. And when you go vote, make sure that someone goes with you. So, Brother Seawright, thank you for being with us today. Thank you all for watching. And we will see you again on another one of our TCR dialogues for voting engagement and these pop-ups. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you.